So now before we test our code, we will need to link our JavaScript file to our PHP file. Okay, so we're gonna need to add a script element. Okay. With a source going to our profile.js file. Alright, now let's save and have a quick look at our page to see if there are any other changes to be made. So you can see here that we're logged in as username. We're supposed to see our actual username. Okay, so we've done this with our main page PHP file or our notes file. All right, so let's copy the code from there. So this is the code that needs to go in there. Let's do Control F and look for username. Okay. So if I refresh the page now, so we can't see anything there. Okay, so this means that it didn't recognize session username. So let's see if we started a session at the beginning of our PHP code. Okay, so let's start a session right at the beginning. We can copy the code from our notes page. Okay, so we started a session, and also if we don't find a session user ID, we can redirect the user to the landing page. Okay, so let's copy this whole code. All right. Now let's save and refresh. Okay, so we can see the correct username. All right. All right, now it works, but we're gonna have a problem later on. So the reason why is because the value we used here is the value that we had in the session array. Okay, so let's say that we update our username. If you update the username is going to get updated in the users table, but you're still going to be using the same value which you stored in the session array, okay, which is the old value. So to avoid this, we're not going to use the value we have in our session array. We're going to go to the users table and retrieve the username from there. Okay. And then we're going to use that username that we find to fill this username. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Basically, in this PHP code, okay, we're going to retrieve the username from our users table. Okay, so to do this, we're going to connect first to the database by including our connection file. Okay. And then we're going to need to run a query which will get our username from this table. So we're going to use the user ID, okay, to get the username. If you remember, we stored the user ID in the session array, and that user ID is not going to change during the whole session of this user, so we can use it for this purpose. Okay, so let's store it inside a variable user ID. So So you're going to get it from the session array. So we use the key user ID like this. Okay. So now let's get our username. We can get the email as well, okay, which we'll use later on for the email code. So let's get them both to save time. All right, so our query is going to be to select records from our table, users, where the user ID is that one. Okay. Now let's store the results inside the results variable. So the MySQLi query function again will take the link variable where we stored our connection and our query. All right. All right, now we know that there is only one record in our users table with that user ID. But still, we're going to check how many rows, okay, we've got inside that results variable. So we're going to define a variable count, okay, where we're going to store the number of rows. So to get the number of rows, it's MySQLi underscore number of rows, and it's going to take as a parameter our results variable. Okay. So now we're going to check if the number of rows is 1. So if count is 1, then we're going to fetch the only row we've got, okay? And we're going to store that row inside a variable that we're going to call row. All right. So to fetch rows, we're going to use the function MySQLi fetch array. Okay, so you must know this one. You've done it many times. So the parameters are going to be our results variable. Okay, and you can add an optional parameter. So let's go for an associative array. So for this, we're going to use MySQL underscore associative. All right. Okay, so now we've got our only row. Okay, so to get the username from that row, let's define a variable username, and we're going to access the username using the key username. Okay, this corresponds to the same name of our column. Okay, and to get the email, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use the key email. Okay. All right. If the count is not equal to 1, then we're going to echo an error message. Well, if the code is written correctly, you're not supposed to get this. Okay. We're going to write it just in case. So there was an error. Okay. Retrieving the username and email from the database. Okay, so let's save this. Now, to show the username, right there, and right there, we're going to use our username variable. Very easy. Okay. So we're gonna change this to username. Okay. Also, we're gonna go to our table and change this value to the username variable. Here we go. And finally, inside our form, we need to do that as well. So instead of value, we're going to echo our username. Okay, make sure you don't miss the semicolon. Okay. Okay. All right, so let's save and refresh. Okay, so you can see the correct username. Now let's change our username. Okay, and submit. Okay, and you can see the new username, okay, updated. And if we check inside our table, we need to see the new username. And that's great. We've got the new username there. Okay. All right. So in the next video, we're going to move to the password. Okay. I'm going to leave the email till the end because it's more complicated. So we're going to do the code which will change the password.